Welcome Internet to Psychoanalytic Talk, and today we're going to be talking about the operational thought by Pierre Marty, a French psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and founder of the Psychosomatic School of Paris. So Pierre Marty develops this concept in the early 60s, in which he's going to say that some people will have what he calls operational thinking or operational thought. In French, it's Pensée Operatoire, right? So the exact translation, I have never found it, so if you know it, please feel free to drop it in the comments. The idea of the operational thought is that some patients have a way of thinking that does not include reverie, does not include symbolization, that does not include desire. It's something in which if the therapist comes to contact with these types of people, he will have the feeling that those people are purely factual, i.e. it's what they describe is solely a succession of realistic events, that the mind does not really come into play in all of this. It's really just step A, then step B, then step C. The mental life of fantasies, of constructs, of projections, all of that seems eerily absent, as if it was not really there, or if it was not at the forefront, but even more, perhaps more precise than that, it's as if it was not there at all, present within the conversation. So what Pierre Marty argues is that these people basically do not have a fantasy life and do not process mental operations in terms of psychic defenses, i.e., for example, internal conflict, which is going to fight between, let's say, different instances. Like, let's say the id, classically, the id wants to do something, the ego is like mitigated on it or a little split on the subject, and the superego is like enforced no, right? I mean, very classic Freudian definition, right? Internal conflict. But, and this is where the big but comes, in the process of operational thought, there is no such conflict. What's going to happen is that it's going to be factual. However, what should have been processed by the mind is going to go somewhere else. It's going to be processed by the body. So it's the body that's going to become the playground of mentalization, because mentalization is not there within the mind, because it cannot be processed through the mind. It's going to be processed through the body. So what Pierre Marty argues is that this processing of the body is going to create psychosomatic states in which the individual is going to basically talk about pains, about physical suffering. However, medically speaking, there's going to be nothing that will attest to that suffering, medically speaking. Therefore, the body itself will become the container of all of what cannot be thought, all of what cannot be processed. And this is very important, as our mental lives also allows us to play out a lot of feelings like aggression, pleasure, fear, desires, and so on and so forth. So much is going on. And when it's absent, it's not that nothing is going on, quite the opposite. It's just that it's another instance. It's the body itself that takes on the burden of carrying all of that, of trying to create a certain form of basically conversion of the mental processes into the body. So this concept is very important, as it is basically there to explain why certain people will not have a mental life, will not have a rich inner world. Quite the opposite, it will be quite absent, quite underdeveloped, and everything will seem to be focused on the external world, on the here and now, on the doing. These types of people, what Pierre Marty says is that operational thought is the signature of people who have severe psychopathological issues, but that are so severe that it's not even a repression, right? It goes even deeper. It's the body that takes everything on its shoulders, both literally and figuratively, as it's the body that carries it. But it's still very very dreadful for the individual. Therefore, it stores sources of suffering. And that school of thought, psychosomatic, establishes that there is a fundamental parallel between thought and body. And if one or the other basically break down, it's the one that remains that will take the overload. So in their case, in the psychosomatic school, there is a lot of emphasis put on the body and its role, the role that it plays. So this concept is very, very interesting, operational thought, and I personally adore it because it explains so well how sometimes conflict seems to be absent, or that some people that come in with to see you as a psychologist with bodily pains and are going to talk about their whole bodily pains, but at no point will they talk about their mental life. Of course, it's our job to reach out to them and to allow them to create that space that was perhaps never created. So even though in the original article they don't go into too much detail on the why and the how of that operational thought, one can think that basically it could be a symptomatology of a parent that was maybe neglectful or at least wasn't able to give the basis of a development of that mental life. That mental life was frozen because it was never there. So therefore, what happens is the individual super focuses on the body and the external environment, as if basically the mind was absent, as if it was never built. I also think, and this is my personal add-on to this, so take it with a pinch of salt, but I also think that people that feel that their minds are poisons, that you shouldn't engage in the mind itself, the mind is an illusion, might fall into operational thought as well. Also, I think that those who have experienced severe trauma might want to block off the mind. Therefore, the body will take the relay of the mind, and therefore create an operational thought. I will also argue that operational thinking is also very present when people have been damaged on emotional and self-esteem level, that they will stop looking inwards because they've been so devalued, so broken, so hurt, that they will only look at the external world, only look at their bodies for answers, as if everything was trying to be objective and showable, demonstrating something, showing something that can be fixed or healed or something like that. Whereas the internal world is not showable, cannot be demonstrated as easily, as simply as basically the body can, or at least something in the external world. I will also say that this operational thought is a concept that is still relatively controversial, as for example, for the Lacanians, there is no such thing. They're very, very critical on this idea. Why so? Well, because for them, operational thinking would imply that the people that have it are somehow intellectually disabled because they don't have a mental life, because they don't have a psychic life. It's an argument that I've always found completely idiotic for many reasons, because A, someone with intellectual disability can have a very rich internal world. They might not be willing to share it because it might be a little scary, but it can be very rich. Second, it's not because one has no internal life that one lacks intelligence, and I think that that's a very idiotic way of presenting it. But I just wanted to be completely upfront that it is not one of those concepts that everyone agrees on. Quite the opposite. That some people fundamentally disagree on it. But it's still so interesting to me that this idea that mind and body are connected, and that the body, of course, influences the mind, as we see, for example, when someone has cancer or severe chronic illness or pain, that this is going to have repercussions on the psyche of the individual. The person is going to over-focus on the pain, or think about the pain, or be afraid of the pain, or be afraid of sins. And that, how can I say, even when we have an illness, for example, when we have fever, there might be, we might not be able to concentrate. Some people might, even if the fever is very extreme, have hallucinations. So we know the body influences the mind, right? But the mind also influences the body. And I think that that's one of the major forces of the psychosomatic school, because it says that no, it goes both ways, and very clearly, operational thinking is a way of presenting the effects that the lack of mind or the lack of inner world can have on the life of an individual and how it can present. And also, it gives a good, I think, an interesting framework to think that if someone on the surface does not seem to have an inner world and seems to have bodily problems and basically talk immensely of those bodily problems if they were a substitute for inner conflict, then there is something to build with a patient, and something like a new space for the mind to develop, to enrich itself, enough for the bodily problems to take a backseat from their mental life, from their emotional life. And also, and I'm going to precise this as well, the emotional output of these people is very, very hard. They have a hard time identifying their emotions. So we could link it also to alexithymia, i.e. emotional blindness. Because if it's never been there, if no one has ever been able to help the individual navigate the emotions, understand them, give them a place, basically show them that they have not just a 3D dimensional external world, but also a much more in-depth, much more subtle, and much more wonderful inner world. If there hasn't been someone to basically show them that there is both, then the internal world will not develop. In a way, it will be atrophied, meaning the person will not be able to go back to it, creating a way in which only the body and the external world are invested, because that's the only thing that was shown, that's the only thing that was observable. Because as Winnicott points out very well, that we always need someone to be a mirror, especially in very infancy, but I think that goes on through all of our lives, that we always need other people to be like a mirror to ourselves, and we are mirrors to other people as well, right? It goes both ways, of course. And I found that operational thinking is very, very interesting as a concept. And it's one that I have to admit I am not necessarily completely well versed in, but I still find it interesting. And I know enough about it to be able to share it with you through this video. So I hope you liked it. If you have any questions, any feelings, anything you want to say, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.